Hi everyone, welcome to lesson 14. This is the last lesson in our second unit. So it's the last lesson that will be covered on our second test. I'm planning to make two separate videos for this lesson. The first one will focus on a lot of symbols. We'll see some number lines. We'll talk about interval notation, which we'll see in a minute here. And then our part two will deal with actually solving inequalities in some similar ways to solving equations. So let's talk about some symbols here. These symbols up here are called inequalities or inequality symbols. We have less than or equal to, notice the line underneath. And then we have greater than and greater than or equal to. So there's different ways of remembering which symbol is which. You can use little tricks you might have learned when you were younger, like the sign eats the bigger number, right? So if you have something like, if you say 2 is less than 5, here I'll write that. Let's say we say that 2 is less than 5. The less than sign kind of looks like a letter L. That's kind of how I think about it. If you could see me right now, I would be making a letter L shape with my left hand, and that's another way to see the less than sign. Or, maybe a little bit more fun, you can draw little teeth in that symbol. There you go. Now it's a scary mouth trying to eat the bigger number. So whatever works, notice that it's opening towards the bigger number. Okay, so that's a less than symbol. Greater than will face the opposite way. All right. So what else? When you have the equal sign underneath, that little line underneath, then the phrase is, instead of just less than, it's less than or equal to. Let's take a look at some number lines and how we can illustrate this. So our first number line, we have an arrow going to the left. It's starting at this number 5. Notice the symbol that's on the number line here, it looks like parentheses. So the parentheses are kind of opening towards the left here, and then the arrow is going to the left. So what this is illustrating is all the numbers on the number line to the left of 5, but not including 5. So in other words, it's all the numbers that are less than 5. So notice the little statement right below, x less than 5, or x is less than 5. X stands for all these numbers. So this is an illustration of all the numbers that are less than 5. Notice that there's an arrow. It's going on forever in that left-hand direction. All right, so the parentheses symbol implies that we're not including that endpoint, so we're not including the 5. So that's why there's no equal sign under that inequality. So x is less than 5, not equal to 5, just less than 5. All right, our next number line, this time the arrow is going to the right. It's starting at -3. This time, notice that different symbol. I'm going to refer to this as a square bracket. So when you have that square bracket, that does imply that you have an equal sign underneath your inequality. Okay, so the equal sign, you have that line underneath your inequality. You also have a square bracket. So those symbols will go together. So no equal sign means parentheses. Equal sign means square bracket. Also notice this arrow is going to the right. So these are all the numbers that are greater than or equal to -3. So now we are including the -3. That's part of this answer. -3 is equal to itself. So -3 is in this group here. Okay, so take a look at the difference between these arrows. We have a less than arrow going to the left. X is less than 5. We have that parentheses. The next example, we have greater than or equal to. We have a square bracket, and it's going towards the right. Okay, there's really a couple other examples that we can see. I'm going to now show you one example for each different symbol. So this is only 2 out of the 4. We're also going to learn something called interval notation. So I'll just give you a quick preview of that right now. For this first number line, where it was x is less than 5, I'm going to add a little label on this number line. On the left side, I'm going to write a minus sign and then what looks like a sideways 8. This is called negative infinity. Okay, you've probably heard the word infinity before. Infinity is not a number. It's more of a concept or a direction. So infinity, that would be in the positive direction. So I'm going to also add an infinity off to the right of my number line. Okay, so that's really what we mean when there's an arrow. These numbers go on forever. They don't just end where my screen ends. They go on forever in both directions. So the way I would write my answer in interval notation for this first arrow, for this first number line, here's what it looks like. I would start with parentheses and then I'd write negative infinity, comma, 5. And then remember how we had parentheses on the number line? We would close up our answer also with parentheses. You haven't seen an official definition of interval notation yet, but you're about to on the next slide. So this is just a little preview. When your arrow is going to the left, interval notation would be written like this with parentheses, negative infinity, comma, and then whatever your number is would come last. The second example is kind of the opposite. If you label some negative infinity and positive infinity on either end of your number line, notice this arrow, the one I've written in blue here, where you're going off to the right, it's pointing towards infinity. So this time, if we read it left to right, we would start off with square brackets, then we'd write -3, comma, infinity. Now to close up my interval here, an interval is basically a group or kind of a, I think of it as like a chunk of numbers. And we like to write our interval in order from least to greatest. So that's why we wrote the infinity last. So again, square bracket, negative infinity, or -3, comma, infinity. What I was going to say is to close up our interval, we always put parentheses around infinity. We would never put square brackets because you can't include infinity. That doesn't make any sense. Infinity is not a number. However big you can imagine, it's always bigger than that. The arrow always goes on further. So here are some examples of what we call interval notation. Notation just means naming something. What's another way of naming an inequality? All right, I told you there are a lot of symbols here. Let's take a look at the next slide and we'll get a better summary of this. All right, so interval notation. What was I talking about with that? Here you have a list of all the different possible types of inequalities and then the interval notation that goes with them. So let's take a look. Our first row of our little chart here is x is greater than a. So a can be any number. That inequality can be represented with this interval, parentheses, a, comma, infinity, close parentheses. Let's sketch that on a number line here. What would that look like? So this is, I'm going to keep it basic, just drawing a number line. I'll just put a somewhere on the number line. And then let's decide what kind of arrow we're drawing and where it's going to go. So if x is greater than a, I'm not including the a. So I need parentheses, the same symbol that we have in our interval here. We're going to infinity. So my arrow is going to go to the right. So I'm going to start with parentheses facing towards the right. And then my arrow will also point towards the right. That's what my number line would look like. Let's go to the second example. The next one is similar. X is greater than or equal to a. So how's that going to be different? Well, now we have some square brackets for our interval. Instead of parentheses a, comma, infinity, we have square bracket a, comma, infinity. That's what we're going to have on our number line as well. So if we illustrate this on a number line, I'd still have a labeled somewhere. Whatever that number is, we'd find it. And then this time my arrow would still go off to infinity to the right, but this time I would have square brackets around that a. So instead of parentheses like before, those kind of round parentheses, sometimes those are called open parentheses, we used closed brackets. So again, parentheses, we sometimes call those open, square brackets, call those closed. So notice this question that was written right above our table. When do we use parentheses and when do we use square brackets? Parentheses We use that when we have either less than or greater than inequalities. And then for square brackets, we use those when we have less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. That's what makes those close, it's those equal signs underneath. Okay, so we've seen the two examples with greater than or equal to. Let's do the next two. These will go in the other direction, towards the left. So the next example is x is less than b. Let's label b on our number line. And our interval is going to be parentheses, negative infinity, comma, b, and then parentheses again. This is a little out of order from what you might expect. We don't start with b in our answer because look at what the arrow would look like. Okay, so x is less than b. I'm not including the b, so I'm going to have parentheses. Notice how I'm opening them towards the left because we're about to go in that negative direction towards negative infinity. Now if you read the number line left to right, it would go parentheses and then negative infinity, comma, and then b would be where you'd end your interval. So see how the order is changed based on the direction of your arrow. So anytime you have less than, it's going to start with negative infinity, comma, and then the number. Always put parentheses around any kind of infinity. And then the reason why I had parentheses around the b is because there was no equal sign in our symbol. That brings us to the last example in this table. So the last one is x is less than or equal to b. Okay, so my arrow will look very similar to the one that came before, still going to the left towards negative infinity. But this time there's an equal sign, so this time I will have square bracket. So that's why that square bracket is there in your interval. So x is less than or equal to b goes like this, parentheses, negative infinity, comma, b, and then when you close your interval, it's not parentheses you're ending with, it's a square bracket. And again, the square bracket is because you have that equal sign under your inequality. So one more time back to the original question, when do we use parentheses? We use those for a less than or a greater than inequality. And when do we use square brackets? We use those for a less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. So that's how you can kind of tell the difference there. It's all based on whether you're including your endpoint or not. Is it equal to or not? Okay, let's do some examples of our own down here at the bottom. So number one, x is less than 5. So our directions say, write each inequality in interval notation, then graph it on a number line. That's the order that you'll be asked to do it on your homework. I would recommend that you graph it on a number line first. Sketch that out for yourself first, because that will help you to kind of line everything up in order. Okay, so here's my number line with 5 on it. I'll just add a few more numbers around it. So I have a number line that has 3, 4, 5, 6. Could go on beyond that, obviously. So x is less than 5. All right, so I'm not including the 5. And where am I going? If this is less than, I'm going to the left. So my arrow is going towards the left. There's no equal sign, so I am not including the 5. So I need parentheses around that 5. So take a look at the number line. It has parentheses facing to the left. The arrow is pointing to the left. That's my number line. My interval will go in that same order from left to right, but over here on the left, you should really have a negative infinity. So it goes like this, parentheses, negative infinity, comma, 5, and then close parentheses. It's similar to that third row of our table where it had x is less than b. Our arrow should kind of match that, right? So negative infinity, comma, b, and then arrow going to the left. Notice the parentheses around the 5, again, because we're not including the 5. Also notice the order. So in case you're wondering, could you write 5, comma, and then negative infinity? No. Intervals need to be in order. Okay, so it needs to go left to right, least to greatest. So it's really important that you have the negative infinity coming first before the number. All right, let's look at number 2. X is greater than or equal to 1/2. All right. So let's sketch this on a number line. Now 1/2, where is that going to be? Well, it's positive and it's less than 1, so it's literally halfway between 0 and 1. So I can set up a number line. I'll just put 0 and then 1 on the right and -1 on the left. 1/2 would be right between 0 and 1. Okay, and then here, I'll add a -1/2 between 0 and -1. So x is greater than or equal to 1/2. Okay, greater than means we're going to the right. Equal to means we get to include the 1/2 in our number line. So we're going to use square brackets. So we're going to the right and we're using square brackets. Here we go. So I have the square brackets around the 1/2. My arrow's going to the right. See how my arrow kind of sets me up to write my answer in interval notation? So read it left to right, square bracket, 1/2, comma, and then, wait, what goes here? Oh yeah, we're going towards infinity. Now don't put a square bracket around the infinity. Remember, we always close our interval around infinity with parentheses because we never include infinity. The arrow goes on beyond that. So we leave it kind of open around the infinity. So again, x is greater than or equal to 1/2, square bracket because we're including the number. We have the equal sign. It's going to the right because it's greater than. So our interval is square bracket, 1/2, comma, infinity, and then close it with parentheses. Okay, all of this is practice for writing our answers to inequalities in interval notation, because eventually what we're going to be doing is not only solving for x, but once we get an answer like x is less than 5, we're not done. We also have to write the answer in interval notation, and we have to graph it on a number line. On your homework, you'll be able to select from some multiple choice options for that. Okay, let's look at a few more. These next examples, this is actually a bit of a preview for lesson 15, but we'll look at it now. These are called compound inequalities. So a compound inequality is basically two inequalities combined together. So you'll see in these compound inequalities, x will be in between two numbers. So these number lines will not have arrows in their final answer. It'll be kind of like shading in between two numbers. So here's the first one. A is less than x, which is less than b. Another way to say this is a is less than x and x is less than b. Here's one more way to say it. X is greater than a and x is less than b. Now look what I just did there. X is greater than a. Wait, what happened? Didn't it say a is less than x? Yeah, those are the same thing. If x is less than a, then, or sorry, said it wrong. If x is greater than a, then that's the same thing as a being less than x. So for example, 5 is greater than 4, so 4 is less than 5. Those are the same. Okay, I've just made it sound harder than it is. Here's the interval notation. There's parentheses on both ends. A comes first, then a comma, and then B comes last. There's no infinity for these because your number line is not going on forever. X is just in between two numbers. So here's my number line. I'd have A and B. X is less than B, and X is greater than A. So X is just between the two. And then we just put some parentheses for both because there's no equal sign for either inequality. So A is not included and B is also not included. That's why we have the parentheses. All right, let's look at the next one. A is less than X and X is less than or equal to B. Okay, so the difference for this next one is that less than or equal to B, which means when we shade our number line here, X is still in between A and B, but this time I'm using parentheses around the A, but I'm using a square bracket around the B. Why are we doing that? It's because of this equal sign under the B, or under the inequality. So again, it's A is less than X, and X is less than or equal to B. So X is in between those two numbers, A and B. There's parentheses around the A because the A is not included. And there's a square bracket around the B because of that equal sign under the inequality. All right, next one. This time, A is less than or equal to X, and X is less than B. So this time it's the A that has the equal sign under it. So when I write my interval, I'm going to start with a square bracket. And then A, comma, B. This time B is not included, so I will end with a parenthesis. So square bracket, A, comma, B, parentheses. Here's my number line. I'll label A and B. This time, when I kind of color in between them, I will have the square bracket around the A, again, because of that equal sign under the inequality. And I will not have a square bracket around the B. I'll leave that as parentheses because there was no equal sign in my inequality. So notice the symbols on the number line exactly match the symbols in the interval. So if there's two parentheses in the interval, there's two parentheses on the number line. Or if there's one of each, then there's one of each there. All right, last one in the table here. A is less than or equal to X, and X is less than or equal to B. This time, both A and B are included because of those equal signs, so both of them get square brackets. So my last number line here, where X is between A and B, this time we're including both because both of them have equal signs under their inequalities, so I get to have square brackets around both. So I'm still kind of shading in between, but this time the square brackets, or there's square brackets for both variables because both of them have those equal signs. All right, number one, example to do on our own. Here we go. So examples, write each inequality in interval notation, then graph it on a number line. So number one, -2 is less than or equal to X, and X is less than 5. Okay, check to see if these numbers are in order from left to right, and they are, least to greatest. So -2 is first in my interval. Notice the inequality. See that equal sign? That means I need a square bracket around the -2. Then a comma. 5 is on the other side, but that one is not included because there's no equal sign under that inequality. So after I write the 5, I'll just write parentheses. So it's square bracket, -2, comma, 5, close parentheses. Let's sketch it on a number line now. So let's see. 4, -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. It's important to be able to draw your own number lines, but the reality is in MyLabs Plus, they're already drawn for you. You just choose the correct choice. Okay, so square bracket around the -2. And then going all the way up to 5, and then parentheses around the 5. Look at my interval symbols here with the square bracket and the parentheses. Those are exactly the same on the number line, and then we're just shading in between. There we go. All right, next one, number 2. 3 is greater than or equal to X, and X is greater than 0. Notice the inequalities here are facing, kind of opening towards the left, and compare that to the chart we just filled out. This is different, okay? Something is off here. So also notice our endpoints. 3 is on the left, but then 0 is on the right. That's not gonna work on a number line, okay? 3 doesn't come before 0. So we need to rearrange this. Here's how you do it, okay? You pretty much just leave the X in the middle. The 0 needs to come first, and then the 3 needs to come last, okay? So I've rearranged it with 0, and then X, and then 3. Now it's important that I carefully rewrite my inequality symbols. So let's see how to do this. The original inequality started with 3 is greater than or equal to X. Well, that inequality is now moved over here on the other side. Instead of 3 is greater than or equal to x, it's now x is less than or equal to 3. And instead of x being greater than 0, now I'm writing it the opposite way. Instead of saying x is greater than 0, I'm saying 0 is less than x. Those are saying the same thing. By rewriting it, now I'm making sure that I have my number line in order, and I'll be able to finish it. Okay, so I'm labeling some things on my number line. So notice when I sketch these number lines, I just make sure I have the numbers in the problem represented here. So I made sure I had a 0 and a 3 and some numbers around them and in between. So I labeled it from -1 up to 4. X is in between 0 and 3. All right, and I just need to be careful about my symbols here. Now 0 is not included, so I need parentheses there. So I have parentheses around the 0, then I'm kind of shading where my arrow would go. And then I'm ending up here at the 3, but this time we're including the 3 because of that equal sign. So x is less than or equal to 3, so I'm including that. Okay, so parentheses around the 0, and then shading, and then square brackets ending at the 3. That right there is essentially what my interval will look like. So my final answer will be parentheses 0, comma 3, and then close it with a square bracket. So I think in the examples we've done, you've seen sometimes I've started by drawing the number line first and then the interval like we just did here. Sometimes I've written the interval first and then the number line. Either way is fine. They all connect. Okay, so that's why I had us fill out this chart so you could see the relationship between the inequality symbols, less than, greater than, etc., the less than and greater than or equal to, noticing when we use parentheses, when we use square brackets, and then noticing how the number line symbols really line up with the interval notation. Okay, so that right there is a lot to digest, especially if you've never seen this before. So let's pause for a moment. We'll take a quick look at some of the homework problems related to these questions, and then we'll save the actual solving for our part 2 video. So I'm just pausing and bringing us over to MyLabs Plus for a bit. Okay, we're now looking at homework 14. Question 1 and question 2 are a little different, and I want to save those for the next video. So we'll just start with number 3 on the homework, which focuses on interval notation. So here's an example of a question. Here's number 3. Write the set. And then you have these kind of squiggly brackets, x, and then this vertical line. And then it says x is less than or equal to -2, and then some squiggly brackets again. Okay, this is called set builder notation. I did not really include this in the notes. I will just write out what this interval is really, or what this set is really saying. Okay, so a set is kind of just a group. Okay, so when you see these little squiggly brackets and then an x, it's the set of all x such that, and then the such that, that's kind of what that line means, that kind of up and down, almost looks like an I, but it's a line. We're basically saying, okay, we're about to describe x. Now here's what we can say about them, such that, what are we going to say about x? Well, that brings us to the inequality. X is less than or equal to -2. Okay, so that's how you would say that in words. The set of all x such that x is less than or equal to -2. All right. So just kind of drawing a little arrow here. So it's the set of all x such that, and then here's the inequality part that we really focused on, x is less than or equal to -2. So let's quickly sketch that on a number line. Here's -2. We'd be going to the left because it's less than. Because it's less than or equal to, we would be including that -2 with that square bracket. So take a look at my number line here. My arrow is going to the left. I have a square bracket around the -2. Now I have these choices. Choose the correct interval. I should choose one that's going toward -infinity. So that rules out choice A and D here because those both are going to +infinity. So if you look at my choices, my choice B looks like this, parentheses, negative infinity, comma, -2, and then square bracket. Choice C is parentheses, negative infinity, comma, -2, parentheses. Okay, I want the one with the square bracket. So that's going to be choice B. Again, because it's less than or equal to, we're going to the left toward negative infinity. The equal to is why we have the square bracket. Okay. If it was greater than, then we would choose something with positive infinity, but we want to choose something with negative infinity because of that less than symbol. Okay, good. Number 4, this is considered a compound inequality. So write interval notation for the set. So it's the set of all x. I'll type this out again. The set of all x such that, and I'm going to say, let's see, the x is in between -9 and 9. The -9 is included and the 9 is not. So let's write that out. Here we go. So the set of all x such that -9 is less than or equal to x, and x is less than 9. All right, let's sketch it out. Here's my number line. Everything's between -9 and 9, so I'm shading in between those. All my choices involve those numbers, so it's just a matter of symbols. What are my symbols going to be? All right, the -9 has that equal sign with that inequality. So -9 less than or equal to x. So that means I want a square bracket with the -9. But then when we continue reading, it's -9 less than or equal to x, and x is less than 9. So that one does not have an equal sign. So we will not include the 9. So that means we need a parentheses around the 9. So that should narrow it down. So I have square bracket around the -9 and then parentheses around the +9. So look at your choices carefully. Looks like choice D is the one that matches what we were able to narrow it down to. So it comes back to really knowing your symbols, when to use square brackets, when to use parentheses. It all comes down to whether you have the equal sign, that's square brackets, or no equal sign, that would be parentheses. So that was number 4. Okay, number 5 is similar. This is one where the numbers are out of order. So in my set, it goes like this: -4 greater than x and x greater than -10. Those numbers are out of order. And if you look at our choices, all the choices have the -10 coming first. So it's really just a matter of knowing which symbol to use. Because neither of those inequalities have equal signs, it's going to be parentheses on both ends. Oops. So that pretty much narrows it down. It would be important to rewrite this though. So a better way to rewrite this inequality would look like this: -10 is less than x, which is less than -4. So see how I've rewritten it and just put the numbers in order. So it should be parentheses, -10, comma, -4, and then close the parentheses. And that would be choice A. That's another compound inequality. All right, now number 6, we see a graph, and then we get to choose the correct interval. So the graph goes from -1 to +8, parentheses on both numbers. That right there pretty much gives it away. Look at your choices. It's the one that has parentheses around -1, and then a comma, and then parentheses around the 8. That's going to be choice D. Okay, so make sure the order is correct, and make sure your symbols for your interval match the symbols for your number line. Okay, number 7 has a square bracket around -2 on the number line, and the arrow is going off to the right, and it is an arrow. Okay, so it might look like it's stopping at the number 10 on your screen. So we do have a -2, 10 choice here, but it's not stopping there. Okay, there's an arrow going beyond the 10. So we know we're actually going toward infinity here. So it's actually going to be square bracket, -2, infinity. And then we need to make sure the infinity has parentheses around it. Let's see what happens when I choose the wrong choice. So I'll choose the one that has square brackets around infinity. Okay, so here's my little error message. Since infinity does not describe a real number, it cannot be included in the interval. Okay, so that means I need to choose choice C instead. And then notice how that button said final check. I only got two chances for that one because it's multiple choice. You're not going to get three chances for a multiple choice question. But you can always click similar question. Okay, and then starting with number 8, this is where we would actually start solving for a variable, which we haven't covered yet. So I will stop here. This was part 1 of lesson 14. As you can see, we're on number 8 out of 35. So there's a lot of problems in this homework section, and most of them will look kind of like what you're seeing here, where you're solving an inequality and getting a variable by itself. So give yourself a little break and come right back and take a look at our part 2, where we actually solve some inequalities. All right, see you soon.